Well, greetings all. Joseph Kerski here. Thanks, Lee, for the kind words and for inviting me today. Folks, I know that you've had some snow for those of you that are down in Lee's part of the world in Memphis. My physical geography professor would always say physical geography has the last word. So I hope you folks are all safe and sound and not on some sort of treacherous roads right now. I'm speaking to you from Colorado, so just a few degrees of longitude west of you over at the 105th meridian. And we've got some blustery days right now, but all is clear. Great honor to be with you all. I'd love to have a chat with you in the future about how to connect with GIS educators and education. Lee has asked me to address this important topic, and I'm very honored to do so. So, folks, in the chat box, I'm going to put the story map for this particular webinar for today. And I'll do that at some point so that you can actually access this in the future and share it with others. I know it's also being recorded. For those of you that couldn't be here today, you can watch it in the future. But I'd just like you to think about the following. At what moment in your journey into GIS did you start to realize that I want to be out on the landscape? I love working with data. Maybe you encountered an educator that helped you see a vision of your future self. Maybe you read a book as a child or a young person that inspired you to get out there on the landscape to think about the world and its people and inspired you to want to make a positive difference. Maybe it was a trip that you and your family took and you were the family navigator. I bet there's some out there that were the family navigator on trips, looking at state highway maps, etc., and navigating your family. But whatever it was in your past, book, mentor, teacher, experience, somehow you said, these are my people and this is what I want to spend at least part of my career, if not my whole career, in this noble endeavor. So what's your story? That all actually feeds into the discussion today about GIS education, because one of the things that I'm going to lay out for you as a tenet is make it personal when you're connecting with educators, students, deans, faculty, facility managers in the world of education. Keep that personal story of yours, your personal journey in mind. In my case, as Lee very graciously mentioned, I have always been passionate about getting out there on the landscape and maps. I think that's partly what binds us together as a community, right, folks? And as Lee also very kindly mentioned, I have toes in 4 sectors of society: nonprofit organizations, government agencies, as you can see here, universities, community, technical, and tribal colleges that I've taught at and or teach at, and also in private industry, since I serve as education manager at Esri. I'm on the education team supporting schools, libraries, tribal colleges, technical colleges, HBCUs, universities, libraries, museums, after school clubs, anywhere where there's education happening. We want to have a positive influence on what gets taught and how it's taught. And I'm going to share this also in conjunction with my admonition to you all to think about your own personal journey, because I'm not going to bore you to tears with my own background, but think about this. I like to show this to students saying 2 things. 1, you don't have to stay at the same organization your entire career. And number 2, geospatial technology and spatial thinking are important no matter what field and no matter what organization you go into. So I hope those are 2 positive notes from my own journey, and think about how you can tie this into your own journey. And again, thinking about our own personal story. This was my backyard when I was a kid. I had a parking lot. Yes, my folks owned a motel in Western Colorado, land of the Ute Mountain Utes. So as a child, I met people that would travel and stay at our lodgings from all over the world. Now, you've probably stayed at a motel at some point in your past where you know there's a family living on site. There are some Super 8s like that where they're behind the office. There's a apartment, and that's basically what my family had. And as a child, I loved hearing those stories of people's travels, met all kinds of new people just about every night at the motel. Okay. And I also made maps as a child on big poster board. I won't bore you with all the details, but I had address ranges even on those maps. What kid cares about address ranges? The point is, you all in the magic community have things that you like to do or liked to do as a growing up person that nobody else liked to do or likes to do now. And that's okay, right? That's part of your unique story that I wanted to share. And Here are my address ranges on this particular map. Again, the 3500 North block, the 4200 North block. Nobody else in my circle of friends, okay, cared about maps or address ranges. And all my photographs as a child are all, oh, excuse me, I'm just a kid, but can I come can I come to your office? I know there's a view out your window that's going to be just right for the angle, the time of day, and the angle of the canyon or the streetscape or whatever it is that I wanted to photograph. So most of my photographs as a child were landscapes and the built infrastructure. Very few people in any of my photographs. Maybe some of you did this as a kid, although this is probably dating me, picking up radio stations and the AM dial at night. How far away? And could I map all of those stations? It was especially a thrill when I got X-Rock 80 from Juarez, from another country, all the way in Western Colorado. But I've been involved with GIS education for the bulk of my career, and this was the location of my first ever totally web-based GIS workshop for educators. This was at let's zoom out a little bit, the University of Oklahoma, just a little bit west of you all, a little bit southeast of me. 3 days, web-only tools. Would it work? Would it fail? That was back in 2010. So since then, we've come a long way as a community, haven't we? We use a combination of desktop and connected to the cloud and completely cloud-based tools nowadays. You have educational leaders in GIS and the GIS professional community that are world leaders. I truly believe that, and that's why it's a great honor for me to be with you all. For example, the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, I've been there several times on campuses, on the campus there. I visit about 35 campuses a year. So I'm not the end all be all in GIS education, although I do appreciate Lee's kind words. But I have this perspective from listening to the struggles, the challenges, the success stories of faculty and also teachers in K-12 schools. I've visited hundreds of K-12 schools over the years as well. Campus visits, why are they important? Because they are listening sessions and they're showing the community that we actually want to partner with them long term. Sometimes when a campus, a school or a university or a technical college says, hey, Joseph, do you have money to fund our lab or our program? Well, no, not really. We don't have a fund. We have people. And that to me is actually a better story because it's a long-term partnership. We care more about teaching and learning rather than, sure, well, I can direct you to funding sources for equipment and things like that. But I think the long-term value is that we want to partner with educational organizations. Why? Because of some of the things that I'll share with you today. We care about spatial thinking and learning. It's so critical to our society, right, folks? But I love your region. Here's me at 35 North, 87 West. That's on the Tennessee-Alabama border. Here I am in a cotton field. Not something I typically get to do here in Colorado, but it was a great thrill for me to be on that actual intersection of latitude and longitude. I know that's pretty geeky and nerdy, but I'm sharing this because I want you to think about your own story and what you could bring to the story of students and encouraging them as they journey forward in their own geospatial enabled career. I just submit that you all in the magic community there, you're leaders. You're leaders in your organizations, in your state, in your region, in your world. You're the folks that are encouraging people to think big and holistically about our world, right? That the biosphere is connected to the lithosphere, is connected to the anthroposphere, right? The human sphere is connected to the hydrosphere. You're the ones that are helping people see the connections and the big picture, the holistic perspective, which is critically important to our 21st century world, right, folks? As you folks know, we've got some serious problems in our world to solve, right? Political instability, crime, pollution of all kinds, air, water, soil, energy, water, population change, sustainability. Gracious, we've got a lot of problems to solve, don't we? And I truly believe that the application of spatial thinking through geotechnologies is going to help us to achieve this more resilient, more sustainable, more equitable future that we all want to have in our communities and in our country and in our world. And geotechnologies, as opposed to 25 years ago when there were articles that came out saying, you know, by 2020, geotechnologies is not going to be a standalone thing. It's going to be so embedded in mainstream IT workflows. Well, to some extent, that's true, right, folks? You've got people in a county government, for example. The assessors are using a little bit of GIS, the parks and rec, the transportation, the zoning people, et cetera. That all across any organization. There's more and more GIS at least being used by more people than X years ago. However, geotechnologies is still a rather unique and much needed way of looking at the world, isn't it? So geotechnologies is still It's not a niche thing like it was a number of decades ago where you had to have a set of manuals, right? Hey, Lee, I want you to learn GIS, and here's a bunch of manuals, right? Now, I'm not saying that GIS is easy now, right, folks? We all know that it takes expertise to get deep and rich knowledge in this, but the world is a complex place. And GIS is always going to be rather complex because the world is complex. That being said, though, as you folks know, it is much more accessible and much easier to use, at least pieces of it, by the wider community, which is actually a good thing for several reasons I'll talk about here in the next 3 hours. Just kidding. We don't have 3 hours. Just wanted to make sure you folks are on your toes. But geotechnologies is going to continue. We're always going to be asking the whys of where, aren't we? But at the same time that we've got all this empowerment, open data, we've got powerful GIS tools that are fairly easily accessible and usable, but we also feel challenged, right? Not just with COVID, but other things that have happened over the last 5 or so years where we feel a bit vulnerable, natural hazards and other things, right? So we feel challenged and yet empowered. So this is sort of a dual nature that we can maybe pick apart today in our webinar. But I truly believe that you folks in the community there in Tennessee and beyond have a key role to play in this decade and beyond. You are the ones, again, thinking spatially, critically, and helping people to build this national spatial data infrastructure that was talked about way back in 1994 by Nancy Tosta et al. You're building the national spatial data infrastructure that we can use to make smarter and wiser decisions. All the parcels that you're creating, the hydrants that you're tagging, the light poles, the zoning, et cetera, the soil moisture that you're mapping, et cetera. You're building this data infrastructure. And it's not just the data and partnerships, right? It's the community that you're building, and I salute you all. You are also revolutionary. I wrote a whole book about the revolutionary nature of the work that you folks do called Interpreting Our World. But the point of that is that this is not that common. We are used to thinking in an interdisciplinary way, right? But that's not all that common in society. People tend to be very, very focused on their thing, which is not a bad thing, right? Because specialization is good, but we also need, and in thinking about your work with educators in the future, as I'm going to encourage you to do in this webinar, thinking holistically across disciplinary boundaries is, I think, really important. So changing the way we see the world, that's your job as GIS professionals, right? You may not think about that when you sit down, at your workstation every day, but that is part of your role. Now, why should you care about geospatial education, which Lee asked me to address today? Well, there are several reasons that come to mind, and I'd love to hear from you about why you're passionate about this topic. You've got kids. You were a kid. You have a alma mater that you're passionate about. You've got a school down the street from your house or your residence. You've got kids at that school. Or if none of those other reasons apply, although one of them surely applies, in that you are all kids once, you care about the future of our world, and you also care about the future of your own organization. Where are those future workers going to come from in your state government, in your private industry, your company, your nonprofit, your academic setting, or wherever you're working? Where are those workers going to come from? It's going to come from the seeds that you and I are planting that we hope are going to sprout into shrubs and trees and forests. That's where those workers are going to come from. So there's lots of reasons, and we could talk about more about why you should actually care about what happens in the world of geospatial education. Now, the challenge that we're all facing, and educators as well, is that we want to build something in education that's future looking, right? We don't want to just teach topic X, whether it's GI science or anything else, like we did 20 years ago, right? We want to look forward to, okay, what are these students going to be preparing for? Many of those jobs have not even been created yet. So how do we actually build education that anticipates workforce demands, but also builds what we are seeking, and that is change agents, positive change agents in society, people that can think big and solve problems. So what do we want the geospatial professional workforce to look like, and how can you lead the way? These are 5 forces, again, just like a lot of other lists that you see on the web and in books and magazines and other places. They are debatable. The 5 coolest places to visit in Tennessee, the 5 coolest bands of all time, right? These are debatable, right? But I just submit that these are a few that we can chew on. The rise of geo-awareness is at an all-time high, right? People are aware of the issues that you and I are caring about: water, energy, population change, soil moisture, etc. natural hazards, and so on. There's a rise of awareness in the general population. They don't always connect it to geospatial technology, but there's an awareness that, yeah, there's some serious issues to solve and we need to solve those. People are enabled to use at least some of the geospatial tools, right? They've got a fitness app. They've ordered something online, that a package delivery. They've had a ride share. They use an online map to navigate their way to their grandmother's house or to the public library or across campus, right? So they've enabled to use some of these tools. And the geotechnologies in that center hexagon having progressed into this cloud-based environment is huge. I mean, it's great to have docs online, right? Documents that you collaborate with colleagues and write a paper or review some procedures for your new specifications at the county government or whatever it is. It's great to have Dropbox, OneDrive, etc. Box.com. It's also great to have music in the cloud, right? So you can stream ABBA's greatest hits. Okay, ABBA was a band. The point is, you've got music online, right, folks? You don't really care where the music is stored or where these docs are actually stored, as long as you can access them and share them. But geospatial technologies in the cloud is really, really even better than those other two things, because we want to collaborate. That was very difficult to do in the past, wasn't it? It was hard for me and Lee to share a project. It's too big to fit on a disk. Oh, it's too big to email. How do we share that stuff? How do we share the models? How do we share the data? How do we share the resulting web mapping applications, et cetera? Much easier to do now. Citizen science or community science or crowdsourcing has become quite large, right? People contributing data about their own community's trees, or that pothole that needs to be fixed, or that broken sidewalk or something like that is happening in their community. And finally, storytelling with maps. Maps have been used to tell stories for thousands of years, right? The Babylonian clay tablet, Al-Idrisi's map on two big plates of silver in the 1100s. Now, that would have been a hard map to fold. Get it? Because it was on two big plates of silver. Etched on clay walls or cave walls, etched in dirt. And in the 20th century, right, on film that was later reproduced into paper maps, and now in our own century, digital maps. So storytelling with maps. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about with working with educators, students, and others is the ethics of mapping, right? It's not just an impassioned, impartial technology. What you do in those maps that you're sharing affects people's perception of the issue, whether it's the social issue in their community, a natural issue in their community, whatever it is. So the colors that you choose, the symbology, the projection, what you leave out and what you put in, when you share, when not to share, who do you share it with, etc., all impact your reader's perception. So storytelling with maps and the ethics of making maps are two of my main passions. Couple of advice pieces as you go forward and work with educators, and we'll talk more about the practicalities here in a bit. I always encourage people, don't just stop at the map. Hey, Joseph, I've got my data on the map, people will tell me, and here's the URL. And I'll say, that's great. And why do I say and? Because it's not just mapping stuff. You folks know this in the geospatial community, but sometimes people get so focused on that final URL or that final layout. The goal is always to understand something, right, in a deeper, richer way. And that's a message to impart to educators and students as you go forward in this. It's not just mapping things. The map is an important step. Looking at things spatially is an important step, but what are you learning about it? What does it actually help you understand in a deeper, richer way? And maybe what does it encourage you to take action on? Ooh, the urban greenway, the litter in my community, the community gardens, the accessibility of ADA ramps, etc. Okay, those are the things that are the higher, more noble goal, right? It's taking action on an issue and understanding what the issues are. So it's not just the mapping, it's the bigger picture. And also don't get too attached to the tools. I mean, I love using GIS tools, and I know you folks do too. But look at this doorstop in an actual high school that I was running a geotech after school club in. What is this? Some of you know that this is an old Mac. So at some time in the past, probably the late 1980s, this was a treasured part of someone's IT infrastructure. And now it's a doorstop. The point is, the tools evolve, right? Nurture this tool. This is the most important tool, right? Your brain, your spatially thinking brain. And that's another message for students. Yes, the tools matter, but the tools evolve. The idea is you want to think about, okay, if I'm going to figure out what the riparian zone, I know in some software, whatever software I'm going to be using, I need to find some sort of proximity or buffer tool, okay? Whether it's on the left side or the right side of the interface, okay, that is not as important as you know that you need to do that. That's why you need to run that tool. So don't get too attached to the tools. And all three legs of what I call the geoliteracy stool actually matter here, folks. The content knowledge. If you're making a set of maps and doing analysis on, let's say, flooding hazards in eastern Tennessee, okay, you need to know about a little bit about at least river dynamics and flooding and human obstructions that they've built and the natural order of streams and all that kind of stuff. Weather patterns, the topography of flood models. Okay, you don't need to be an expert for 30 years before you actually do an analysis, but content knowledge actually matters. And then the skills I'm talking about are not just the skills in GIS. It's communication, it's analysis, it's asking questions, solving problems, and other things that I'll state later. And the geographic perspective, even if someone's in business or economics or social work or health or some other field, the geographic perspective actually matters. And this is where you folks in the geospatial community can actually show leadership because you are well grounded in this geographic perspective. Again, knowing that not all of you are geographers. I'm a geographer, but there are many people, increasing number of people in the geospatial profession, right, that have come into this from health, zoning, planning, parks and rec, habitat analysis, et cetera. They're not necessarily geographers, but they have the geographic perspective. Now, in this story map that I'm going to share with you in the chat box here, I have all kinds of statements about the world employment and industry outlook that I encourage you to take a look at because you need to be aware of what's going on in the workforce. And also just to, again, think about what skills and background do you bring to a future presentation, a workshop, a partnership with a school or a group of students or a group of faculty. Think about your own journey. In my case, my own research is actually about GIS and education, but it doesn't have to be in your case. You don't have to be an educator or really grounded in education to be an effective, positive force in these students and faculty's lives. So I just wanted to impart those couple messages. What and how should students learn geotechnologies in our current decade? Is it just these tools? Well, you know where I'm going to go with that. No, it's not just the tools. My colleague David DiBiase wrote a very intriguingly titled essay about Stop Teaching GIS. His whole point in that very, I think, evocative title was at some point in the past, we had to be very, very well grounded in the tools. And we still do in some respects, but we got to think about the bigger picture because the tools are rapidly evolving. So let's not teach how to buffer, but rather let's solve a problem where we need to figure out that riparian zone or how many earthquakes are within X distance of the plate boundary or how many parcels in Memphis are within X distance of a FEMA floodplain, et cetera. Right? Those are the kinds of things that we want students to think about. What are the problems that they are concerned about in their community, in their region, in their world? So helping students learn how to learn, I think, is the main focus here. There are many indigenous people around the world that are very well grounded in this, what I've been chatting about for the last 10 minutes or so, this whole holistic notion of the lithosphere being connected to the hydrosphere, connected to the atmosphere, et cetera. And I've been working with, for example, tribal colleges around not just the USA, but New Zealand and other places where we're working with building on that indigenous knowledge about the interconnectedness of things and then getting it connected to what students can do with this in their actual careers to achieve their dream goals. And this goes across in other universities and colleges and in schools as well. But there are some roots in this. It just didn't just get invented, right? Indigenous people have been thinking about, and others have been thinking about the interconnectedness of the planet for many, many centuries. Also, one of my messages for educators is you don't need to create everything yourself. Once they get excited about geotechnologies, they want, hey, Joseph, do you have a lesson on Hannibal crossing the Alps in the Middle Ages or the Mongol Silk Road building or floods in Western North Carolina in 1950? Maybe not, probably not. We don't have a lesson on every single thing. What we're trying to do with educators is giving them, the old adage, giving them what? Teaching them how to fish rather than giving them a fish, right? We're teaching them how to solve problems in a geotechnology environment. It's not easy, right? Because they're using a professional tool that you and I have been using for many years. How do they use segments of it to effectively teach a certain topic? Plate tectonics, water quality, population change, equity in their community, the history of a civil war battle, etc. Right? They're teaching a topic using geospatial technology. Now, surely some of them are actually teaching GIS. We'll talk more about those distinctions in a bit. Who needs to know which skills? Now, there are several stories that I'd like to get into in this particular story map, one of which is a student actually in Tennessee that created, this is a high school student flying a UAV or a drone above that student's campus and then creating a web map for an upcoming event. And guess what? That same web map could then be used by the campus facility people to map the campus as they'd never had it before, right? For campus safety, infrastructure mapping, all the light poles, all the water lines, etc. So that actually spun into several different things beyond the original intent, which was to create an event map for a community fair that were held on the school grounds. This story map from a middle school student shows you why I'm so passionate about using GIS in education, because the student, as you probably would suspect, did the standard stuff about, okay, let's map the locations of these whales. But I really like what the student came up with at the end, that there's actually a potential solution here. In this case, the whales were getting caught into lobster traps oftentimes, and so that was their sort of demise. And so the student actually came up with a solution. Again, thinking about, we're not just learning this for head knowledge. We want to actually solve problems with this, and I really love this example of this student. There are many teachers like Eric Bushland that let students fly. The teachers and the professors that say, I've got to be an expert in this before I can teach it to students, are not doing much with geospatial in education, to be honest. It's those teachers and professors that say, I don't have to be an expert in this, but I see the vision. And if I'm learning some of these things alongside my students, that's okay. I don't have to be the sage on the stage. I don't have to be the all-wise Yoda, right? I can actually learn some of this with my students. And sometimes the students, as you probably suspect, for those of you that have worked with students on lots of technology pieces in the past, they'll learn probably some of these technology components faster than the instructor will, but that's okay. The instructor's role is still key, and that's an important note when you go into schools, universities, etc., colleges, that the instructor's role, framing the problem, helping the students to think spatially and critically, is really important still. Okay, so let those students fly. Now, what's happening? Lee asked me to address what's happening in schools and universities here in the year 2024. Happy New Year, folks. In primary and secondary schools, and this is a bit of a geeky map, but because we've got a little red schoolhouse, every time the school has ArcGIS Online. If they have an ArcGIS Online license, we have them on this map. What are they doing with it? They could be doing something with it once a semester to every day, or anything in between. Most of the primary and secondary instruction, with a couple of exceptions that I'll mention, is teaching with GIS. Again, in history, economics, mathematics, biology, geography, etc. It's very seldom teaching GIS per se, but even when you're teaching GIS, it's still real world problems, right? It still taps into those disciplines. The two major exceptions are the EAST program, a little bit west of you there in Arkansas. That's why we've got so many little red schoolhouses there in Arkansas. And then over to the northeast of you all, or at least where most of you are, in Virginia, there's something called the geospatial semester. And so in both of those programs, students actually get some university or college credit while they're in high school to take a GIS class. And then the implications are, okay, what teachers are going to be equipped to teach those subjects, to teach GIS in a high school. So that's where our professional development activities come in. So it's slow but steady progress. And thinking about the web GIS paradigm that I mentioned earlier, with desktop only GIS, when we do professional development for K-12 educators, the implementation was a very, very flat-ish slope. It was still a slope, and more educators used GIS over the years, but then when it became, oh, okay, I can run this online. I don't have to install anything in my school's lab. I don't even need halfway, beefy computers. I can have students on a Chromebook or an iPad or a low-end laptop doing this. Yeah, I can do that. Okay, so then the curve accelerated. We still only have about 10% of all schools, though, that have access to ArcGIS Online. Now it's free, but the challenge is awareness. And another challenge is, hey, I'm a typical teacher. I've got to teach this, this, and this today. When do I have time to do GIS? So that's one of my advice pieces in going forward is further on down in this presentation is if you and I go into a school blazing away saying, hey, GIS is a great tool for instruction. Okay, but I've got to teach world history next hour. How is it going to help me in world history? So you've got to be very focused about what areas of the curriculum are the teachers seeing less engagement. Maybe my materials are nothing against textbooks, and I've written some myself. But if you've got a map that's on page 300 of your textbook and it's ocean currents and it's this big, that's where you can say, hey, there's a dynamic, interactive ocean currents layer in the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World. Nothing to log into. You can use it interactively and explore the depth, the current temperature, etc. The interaction between ocean currents and, oh, I'm going to add biomes. How does the oceans affect the land biomes and the ecoregions? So those are the kinds of things that I'm going to advocate that you actually pitch as your main messages. Now, in higher education, tribal colleges, technical HBCUs, community colleges, and universities, most GIS is still in geography, GIS, and environmental programs. And that makes sense in some ways because they're very well grounded in the whys of where, right? The spatial perspectives and nurturing those. Diffusion is happening into other disciplines, particularly as you can see right here, business. So location analytics is what we call it in business. Supply chain management, target marketing, risk assessment. And those professors that understand the value of location and want to use geospatial, we'll start with something like Business Analyst Web App. It's got a boatload of data. It's got some core functionality in it, but it doesn't have every single thing that you and I love about GIS. But it's enough to get them excited about, oh, I can use this tool in my instruction, and it's going to engage students more. That's a key message. What instructor doesn't want their students to be engaged? That's why they all went into instruction. They want their students to care. So if you go in there saying this can help students to be engaged about a topic, but first of all, listen to them and find out what they're teaching. So diffusion is happening, sometimes at a slower pace than what I'd like to see, but it is happening. And I do have an article if you want to look at 5 shining examples of the use of GIS in university schools of business. Also, digital humanities. I got a call not too long ago from a state university that's, hey, Joseph, we've got our fine arts program, and they've heard about this thing called story maps, and they want you to conduct a couple of workshops as part of our grant for digital humanities. Sure, I said, I'll do that, but it's a nice opportunity to introduce them to underneath story maps, right? Is web maps and layers and this thing called GIS and how do you build those maps that your story map points to. So it was a nice introduction to the wider world of spatial analysis. And they were very passionate about, we want to map all of our narratives of, in this case, Southern New Mexico. Southern New Mexico, the narratives of the history, the landscapes, the paintings, the poetry, the songs that came out of that part of the world. And so they were all excited about mapping, and it was, again, a nice nudge for them and also for me too, to be quite honest. What do I know about fine arts? I'm from geography, but I got to learn about a little bit about their world and what they're passionate about. And they're actually passionate about the whys of where, like you and I are. Now, folks, I just need to step back here and touch base. I've got about maybe 7 minutes left, but I wanted to make sure that you knew that if you weren't already aware, I'm sure all of you are because you've come out of educational institutions. Again, you've got spouses and kids and other people in the world of education. Education is in a continued state of disruption and reinvention. So there's lots of hope, but there's also a lot of disruption there with the demographics changing and some layoffs in education and other things that we could chat about. So how do we influence education with GIS? Lots of ways. serve on a PTO, parent-teacher organization in a school that you care about or that your kids are at, host a GIS Day event, as I know many of you did last November. Be a voice to say, hey, this geospatial stuff actually matters in meetings and in board meetings and other things. GIS advances also very rapidly when there's a geospatial librarian on campus, and I've got a couple of links there that you can explore. That has helped many campuses be empowered in many different disciplines, which I hope you can sense by now that I'm very passionate about. I think GIS is too valuable to be in one or two departments on campus. I really and truly believe in my heart of hearts that it needs to be in many, many disciplines. Why? Because we have problems to solve and we want students to care about their world and be empowered to achieve their dream job having some geospatial technology on their tool belt. So a couple of strategies, I've already mentioned one, that how can GIS enhance those parts of the curriculum rather than GIS is the end all be all to solve all your curricular needs. For one thing, faculty, and I'm sure you too, you folks do as well in your own jobs, you get these ads, right, from companies. Hey, use this tool, use that tool. It'll change your life. It'll be awesome. Okay. What's the value added by using a professional tool like GIS? Educators, just like you all in the GIS professional community, they have to very carefully weigh what are we going to use and what are we not going to use? Because we're spending time here. What are we not spending time over here doing? So the cost benefit, what's the value added? What's the return on investment? And just as one point in this, I know this is a lot of text here, but I wanted to give you some ideas as to what concretely to start with. One of the things that I like to start with is these Living Atlas apps. No login required. If I want to look at, drought aware. Lee and I were just talking about this, drought aware. Okay, so here's a web mapping application. There's about 15 of them in the Living Atlas apps zone. So I can see down in your part of the world that as of the time that this was created, and this is not completely real-time data, but a little bit, a couple months old, but still getting students to think about, okay, drought is not just soil moisture. It's not just, are we going to have enough water for municipal use, for industrial use, for agricultural use, but think about the economics involved. If there's a sustained drought, look at some of these counties. In a certain county that I'm pointing at right now, just a little bit to the south of you, there is over $1 million in winter wheat alone. There's $8 million in soy. There's $5 million in livestock. So just the economic impact of if we have sustained drought, what's that going to mean, not just for water availability, but the economics and the people's livelihoods that depend on moisture. So that is one of them. Thinking about, again, cross-disciplinary instruction. Another one that I absolutely love is the Wayback imagery. The Wayback imagery. So you've got terabyte loads of satellite imagery at your fingertips. Now, with all these apps, you've got a level 1 and a level 2. Level 1 is using the app just as is. You can use it with multiple students, with their own devices, or you can use it with one projector and one instructor, having the students engage with you on asking questions. So in this case, I'm going to make a swipe map. You folks know where I'm going with this, right? I'm going to make 2023 on the right side and 2014 on the left side. So if I'm an instructor at a K-12 school or at a university and I'm teaching about change over space and time, why wouldn't I use this tool? At one glance, I can see, oh, there's massive amount of urban sprawl here. Where is this? It's Las Vegas, right? So if I pan over to the east a little bit, I can see another thing that I love about maps being powerful tellers of stories, and that is at one glance with a couple of swipes here, I can see the issue. Okay, if a community like Las Vegas and Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and we could go on, communities around the world mining their groundwater, that's almost out. Okay, if they're gonna rely on surface water and that the surface level is decreasing, where is the water going to come from in not too many years' time, right? You can see the decrease in the Lake Mead just in those 9 years. It's pretty frightening. So at one glance, you can see what's where, why is it there, and why should we care? What's where, why is it there, and why should we care? Why should we care about urban sprawl? Why should we care about energy? Why should we care about water availability? So these are just two apps in that ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World zone. And now I mentioned level 1, using the app as is. Level 2 is I can bring that data into ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Pro. And then what can I do with it then? I can put on the land cover. I can put on change in population. I can put on the mean annual precipitation, right? I can put other layers in there and then look at, okay, not just the imagery, but other things that are in the same area. So very powerful set of teaching tools and data sets. Getting students to think about coding just by building expressions is another tip I have in here. And since it's my last few minutes, I'm going to go and skip the other ways that you can actually make this effective in schools that and universities and colleges that you're working with. Go outside your comfort zone. I encourage all of you. Some of you may say, Joseph, I don't really have time more than an hour this semester or an hour this winter to spend on education, working with an after school club or a university or a school. What would I do in an hour? So that's where this story map comes in. I also say, go outside your comfort zone. You might not feel comfortable working with educators and students. That's okay. None of us feel 100% adequate at our jobs, right? We have things that our supervisors, our county, officials, et cetera, are telling us to do every day, and we go outside our comfort zone and we accomplish those, right? We find out how to do it. I also read a book that Paul McCartney wrote last year. He doesn't feel adequate as a songwriter. He says in the book, I don't feel like I've completely arrived. So if Paul McCartney can feel inadequate in his profession, it's okay for you and I to feel inadequate in our profession. So I'm going to close with my top 5 skills to encourage when you're working with students. And this applies to really all levels. Be curious. Encourage them to ask questions. Oftentimes in education, we ask students to ask questions only on the tests. Oh, that's too bad, right? Because we need to be encouraging them to think about problems to solve and asking questions even outside the tests. So that leads to tenacity, and asking good questions is part of inquiry. Being able to work with data is another key message for educators. They're being asked to be developing students that are data fluent, that are data literate. And that's perfect for geotechnologies, right? Because you and I, as GIS professionals, we've always been about big data. Yeah, bring it on. Right, folks? So this isn't the end all be all, but my colleague and I have a blog called Spatial Reserves. And it's all about 3 things: where to find data, how do I know if it's any good, and societal issues, equity, ethics, copyright, location privacy, etc. So take a look at that Spatial Reserves. It's designed to be one class period discussion points with students. And also know your geographic and geotechnical foundations. Again, you folks being the GIS professionals, you can encourage them. You know what? The way that you create these maps, you need to think about, okay, this is a map of possible future Arctic shipping routes. There's something called a map projection, and it's probably pretty important that you apply it up here, because why? And then that's your teachable moment about map projections, okay? And then the geospatial technology competency model. A couple of colleagues and I worked with the Geotech Center, a consortium of community colleges, to create this. And what I love about this is that it helps students to think about where are their gaps, but also start with the personal effectiveness competencies. Are you organized? Are you ethical? Can you deal with data? Those foundations are really the fundamental to future success with geotechnologies. Yes, the tools are important too, and yes, all those technical skills matter. Also, think about, this when you're working with students. Ideally, now you and I aren't at the center of this ikigai Japanese diagram, which I love, at every moment of our workday, right? But getting the students to think about, what do you love to do? What do you think the world needs? What can you actually be paid for so you can provide for your families? And what are you good at? What are those things? And then figure out what those are. And then, okay, well, what kind of career pathway can you achieve that gets you close to the center of this diagram? So I like using that diagram. And finally, I'm going to close with this: good communications. Having the students be encouraged to articulate why they care about something. First of all, what do they care about? And then why do they care about it? Why are they passionate about it? And then, do you have an elevator speech? At some point, right, you and I in our careers, we've been asked probably multiple times a year, hey, you're going to have to justify that trip that you want to go on, that conference you want to go to, your position itself. You need to justify why we need to fund you for another year. And you need to have those phrases ready to go. Your 30-second elevator speech, your 1 minute, your half-hour workshop to your board of directors or your county commissioners or whoever it is, etc. You need to have those things ready to go and to be articulate about them. I have a YouTube channel called Our Earth. that I actually have about 10 of these elevator speeches actually on that channel of me in actual elevators, which I know sounds pretty geeky and nerdy, but you can watch those, but make it your own voice, right? Make it your own articulated way of saying, this is why what I'm doing matters to my company, my nonprofit, my federal agency, my city government, etc. All right, folks, this is going to be a very exciting decade for geotechnologies. We need you folks. We need you folks in our society doing the good work that you're doing. You have a key role in achieving a more sustainable world and the wise decisions that will result. All right, I'm going to close with this photograph. See if you guess where I was in Tennessee at this location, wearing my tie out in the field, as I love doing. Anyway, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Questions, comments, issues. I recognize a few faces, a few names on the attendee list here, but I don't recognize others, which is a good thing. So it's great to have all of you here. And I truly hope this has been encouraging and maybe get you thinking in some new ways that you haven't before.
Hey, thank you, Joseph. That was fantastic. Really appreciate your time. And we do have a couple of questions, but most people have put in just some comments or some links to some stuff that can help us out. I will say, Joseph, we did have at least one person that had trouble with sharing, that couldn't see part of the screen. You did say you could post the link to the story map as well.
I just did. Yep.
Okay,
All
excellent.
good, Lee.
Thank you. The main question, Rich Schultz asked kind of a two-part question, so I'm going to read that. The first part was geography departments in higher ed around the country are being merged and other departments minimized or eliminated. How can we get more higher ed students to learn about GIS early in their collegiate careers so they can major in geography GIS and not learn about it in the third or fourth year? So that's kind of the first part. Do you have an answer for that, Joseph?
Yes, well, yes, I know Dr. Rich very well, and he and I and many of you in this community have been involved in that space for quite a while. If the world revolved around us, right, we would maybe do things a little bit differently in education. Part of the legacy that we're all grappling with is this sort of segmentation of higher education in particular, and even K-12, especially at the secondary level, into these buckets. And it kind of made sense for in some ways, right? Because we had to organize our institutions, and so departments were a logical way to do that. There are universities that have gone beyond, one of which is the Arizona State University. I was there in September, and they have something called 10 Across. It's all about looking at the I-10 corridor from California to Florida. It's not a department. It's not a program. It's an initiative campus-wide, and it goes outside the university walls to work with community resilience leaders. So what does it take for a university to see that those kinds of initiatives are valuable for the university to be involved with? Obviously it takes a lot of people to tap on lots of doors and windows to get something like that approved and funded and so on. But there are many other pockets. There's an Atlas program, which of course you and I love that word, Atlas, at the University of Colorado near me in Boulder. That again is a social implications of technology. So I go in there with, hey, there's lots of ethical issues around geospatial technology, location privacy, and other things that you should keep in mind. And so it's a nice way of introducing those students to the world of geotechnologies and the social implications of mapping. So there are others like that. But yes, Dr. Rich is talking about something that's near and dear to my heart as well. And that is, okay, if geography departments close or merge, how can we message this effectively to those whatever they call themselves, global studies, geospatial technology studies, geography and meteorology, geography and agriculture, whatever it happens to be? How do we effectively message this effectively to them so that it actually resonates with their new deans, with their new department heads, and they embrace this and not say, oh, GIS, yeah, we've got that at our university. It's over there. It's not us. But are you wanting the students to think critically and spatially and solve problems? Yes. Okay, well, then it shouldn't just be over there across campus. It needs to be in your. So when data science programs, to Dr. Rich's point, started up, about 6 or 7 years ago in a lot of different campuses, I and, colleagues, some of you and others in the community were saying, hey, it's great that you're starting a data science program at your university. I'm all about, yep, we've got to rephrase things, we've got to rebrand, we've got to make it relevant. There's the geo part of data science. Don't forget the geo part. So it's another way of messaging this to the data science people that to not neglect the geo, that there's a geodata component of data science. So yes, that's a huge question that we could probably spend another whole webinar grappling with, but it's all about how to effectively message this so that it resonates with people and they want to say, oh, okay, I'm going to use a piece of that.
Yeah, I think many educators, at least in my experience, that are in a field like, let's say, biology or something, they may view GIS as a means to an end, as just a tool within their research, not recognizing or fully embracing that GIS, or the location aspect of their research, is very important, and oftentimes is the largest part of their research. So it's sometimes difficult to break down those silos and get people who are hyper focused on one, lane of research to realize that location analytics is adds a lot to what they can do.
Yeah, good point, Lee. And with the messaging to business educators, hey, you care about location, right? Location, location, location. That's central to every school of business. But very few of them are actually using location analytics through geotechnology because they think, oh, that's the geography people, that's the enviro people. Well, again, there are tools like Business Analyst Web to get them aligned with teaching this in risk assessment or target marketing or supply chain management.
Yeah.
I know we've run out of time here, haven't we, Lee? But
Now we can address, I think, the second half of Rich's question, which I think is important. Um, K through 12 is difficult since they have standards and find it difficult to teach geography GIS as a separate subject. Could there be an exclusive geospatial academy designed specifically for geography GIS with micro credentials focused on spatial skills? How could it be funded? That could represent the future of geospatial professional community. So your thoughts on that? Because I've honestly never thought about it, a geospatial academy, but I love the idea.
oh, I do too. And the two that I mentioned are the closest approaches that we've had for 20 years now, the EAST program in Arkansas and the geospatial semester in Virginia. I would love to see something like that be national, where it's, you know, some of you probably recall in the 90s, 80s and 90s, there were CAD labs in most high schools where students actually learned about computer aided drafting. And that was, bordering on GIS. Well, now with the sort of the touching of GIS and BIM and CAD, maybe we need to blow off those embers and say, if we valued that as a society back then, why can't we value it now and have these BIM, CAD, GIS design labs in schools with a course that's built around that lab where they're actually doing hands-on work? So I'd love to see that again. And again, touching on what Dr. Rich was saying about the standards, I did skip this portion, but in this highlighted zone is geo inquiries. Those are set of lessons that I and colleagues have authored, and they're very specific on U.S. history, environmental studies, mathematics, world history, environmental science, et cetera. So they're not from a GIS approach. They're from what are those teachers actually teaching? And here are some short lessons, 2 pages, front and back, each tied to a single interactive web map inside ArcGIS Online. No login required for the level ones, and they're ready to go. And there are questions posed in there that educators can use. Some educators like those, and some say, I like the map and I like the theme, but I'm going to use my own questions. And that's fine too. So they're completely modifiable as well to suit an educator's need. But yes, I would love to see the community come together around this whole, what can we do to be more effective than we have been? Geospatial Academy, something where we collectively work with a national or an international organization, the International Cartographic Association, the National Council for Geographic Education, or the NAAEE, the Environmental Education Association, or the National Council for Social Studies, or some group, and we go to all their conferences, but we've never had that kind of mass, attraction to this. It's always school district by school district, which results in very slow implementation. Sometimes statewide. There's some states that have embraced this, and said, we want to do this in all of our schools. But yeah, this is a tough nut to crack. So always open to ideas. And in universities, there's in all settings, I think I want to impart to folks that there are challenges, but there are many, many success stories. And I know one of the actually one of the attendees here came out of in the webinar today, came out of a high school, and this person used geospatial technology at a high school and then just soared from there. And now this person is a colleague of mine here at Esri, and I'm just, but no matter where they end up working, having students do this in a K-12 situation, there's just, it kind of brings tears to my eyes what these students can do. There's just no stopping them. They're the positive change agents. So if you and I as the GIS professional community can do, even if, like I said, even if you just had an hour, what could you do? Maybe some of these resources would help. I would just highly encourage you to do it, even if it's outside your comfort zone. Thanks, Lee. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. This was fantastic, and we hope we can hear from you again in the future. Thank you, everybody who joined. I really appreciate being here. It was a great talk, and thanks again. Hope everybody stays safe, stays healthy, and hope to see you all again. Bye.
Take care, folks. All the best.